I mean, I think Dan is. I mean, it's no secret that I really enjoy Dan. Obviously, you play for him and have a personal relationship there, and really enjoy him as well. But I've said this before. I think on this pod, but I've certainly said it on the radio show and to people like in one-on-one conversations. Is I have to be careful with DQ because when I'm trying to give analysis to be objective, because from a high level standpoint, he just believes a lot of things that I believe. And so it can become confirmation bias. Like some of his favorite sayings are things that I have said before Dan Quinn ever entered my life as a constant presence, doing the jobs that I do. When he talks about keeping the main thing, and things like that, like these pet sayings and kind of the principles of who you are and what you're about. These are things that I believe work. And so I have to check myself because it becomes confirmation bias. But I think one of the things that Dan, I don't know whether he's ever heard this phrase or not, but one of the things that Dan certainly believes in is a phrase that we talk about all the time on Train with the Best that I learned from Chris, which is methods are many, principles are few, methods don't always last, principles always do. And what it means is like there are certain things that are those non-negotiables and figuring out like what are the things that stretch over time versus the methods of how you actually go about executing them. And when I think about the principles of what DQ seems to have learned over the years is the pass rush, is the ball hawking, is like certain non-negotiables that are the through lines of how he bends the defense from a method standpoint of different coverage structures, different fronts, like how you go about achieving those goals is going to bend and change. But he certainly seems to have both, I think, probably discovered what his principles are, discovered what his things are that are non-negotiable, and then held on to them. And the ability to understand which things are principles and which things are methods are really, really important for a coach, especially a coach in his position where you're designing scheme. Because you have to understand, like, is the important thing here the cover three? Like, is this coverage structure actually the best thing and I need to hold on to that and figure out how to make it work? Or is it something we're accomplishing via cover three and that it's, how to fit things to my personnel or how to create turnovers or how to shut down what offenses are currently doing in the moment? And like his clarity on that by the time he got to Dallas, I think was really, really good. And perhaps in Atlanta, there's a million things that went wrong for you guys in Atlanta and for him in Atlanta in terms of, personnel not necessarily working out, some cap situations that weren't necessarily managed the best. Sometimes you just miss 100%. On players. But that I think I really admire Dan's ability to have that clarity and carry it through to Dallas. And obviously we're very much hoping that it carries through to DC. So that brings us to Dallas.
Yeah. And I think the thing about, so ultimately, what is the underlying issue with cover three at this point in the NFL? It's not that cover three is a bad coverage. People still run cover three. They run different variations of it. As long as you can kind of protect the seams, like it's a fine coverage. It allows you to be +1 in the run game. It's a great coverage structure. I think the thing is that it was so prolific and it was so kind of like, think about it in Seattle. They were running cover three post safety about 80% of the time. Like that's a huge percentage. So what that is doing at some point is it's allowing the offense to play fast. Because basically I know that I don't have to think about anything. I know you are in this coverage. So how do I run my route to beat cover three? And so it was always very liberating as an offensive player playing these cover three teams because you're like, oh, it's Seattle 3. Like I know exactly what to do. Like these are my run calls. These are my routes. This is how I'm going to win. This is what this guy's going to do. And I'm going to see that. I'm not have to think about anything else. They're not even going to play any man coverage. So, and again, that worked for Seattle. But what I think Dan realized is that like you need to, as much as it's important that you play fast defensively, right? And that's what the simplicity of cover three did, allowed those guys to play crazy fast on the techniques. You need to provide some consternation for the offense. And so what comes out of it is you get like kind of him playing a little bit more man, a little bit more match, however you want to characterize that, but a little bit more aggressive coverage structure, coupled with aggressive third down blitz packages that stem to cover three, stem to Tampa 2. And he keeps cover three in there, but he gets back to Tampa 2 pretty significantly, right? Like when you remember we talked about at the beginning of this conversation how like that was like the thing before the league kind of transitioned to cover three. So he said, I'm just going to transition back to cover three to Tampa 2. And the thing that I loved about watching it is the principles of the Seattle team are still there, right? We want fast guys with position flex. And again, that's something that he cultivated over his time, probably a little bit of his time away. Like when he came to Dallas, that was something he really leaned into. But I think you brought up a really good point there with Cam Chancellor. It's like he's a position flex guy. Bruce Irving was also a position flex guy. He played Sam linebacker, but was also a rush end. Is he a big? Is he a little? Right? And I think that kind of got magnified over this time. And you get to Dallas and you say, okay, how do we maximize our pass rush? Let's make it unclear who the rushers are. How do we maximize our coverage? We're going to still play simple coverage structures. We're going to run 3 or 4 of them. We're going to own the heck out of those. And we're going to be able to disguise our man so it looks like cover 3, our man so it looks like Tampa 2, and we're going to be able to get to whatever we need to. And it's going to be able to cause the quarterback for the opposing team to hold the ball longer than we want, let the rush get in there, and let our defensive backs make plays on the football. And I think that was really cool to see because the principle of Tampa 2 is the same as the cover 3, right? We want to be sound versus pass concepts, right? The principles of the man match, it's just a changeup, right? It's just something like, hey, here's this coverage structure that keeps everything in front of you. Good luck competing a pass. But if I know it's Tampa 2, hell yeah, I can complete a pass. But it just takes the quarterback and basically says, I don't know that it's Tampa 2. I don't know that it's cover 3. I don't know that it's man match. And it gives you a moment consternation and that pressure, which again, I credit to him too. Like the pressure package evolved tremendously. Like the third down stuff they do is really fun to watch. Like we got guys mugged up in the A gap. It looks a little bit like Zimmer's old double A gap rushes and stuff. I know everybody runs that now, but like that became a big part of what they're doing. And I just think it's the same core principles. Good pass rush, simple coverage structures, let guys play fast. But we're getting to it with like the illusion of complexity, much like Kyle Shanahan would do offensively, right? It's like, here's our 4 pass concepts. We're going to run them out of 20 different formations. Good luck trying to figure out what's going on, right? And I think ultimately that's what he's gotten to here in Dallas. But the underlying current is the same.
Simple for us, hard for you. That's the goal,
right?
In football, right. Schematically on either side of the ball. And, as we talked about last year, part of the problem was for the defense was it was hard for us, easy for you. And that's why the statistics were at the bottom of all of the categories. So I love that. I think it's really cool. One question I have to wrap up here is when we bring Joe into this, obviously Joe's been around Dan for a long time. In order to do this well, to have this mix, to have it be unpredictable, to have your team, though, still feel like you're in a rhythm, you have to call it well.
Yeah.
What role does, obviously Joe is doing, a version of this. Dan's in the room. Like they're all working together on the field in the teaching spaces to make sure that these guys know it on a high level. But ultimately the big challenge one of the big challenges for Joe Witt as a first-time DC is going to be in the game. Do I call the right thing at the right time? Was there anything from a play calling, sequencing, whatever kind of lens that you think is significant to point out that Joe Witt's going to have to make sure that he's on top of? Or is the general variety actually make this kind of easy to call? And not that you could throw darts at a board and pick whichever one the dart lands on, but that it's not as it's actually how I guess the simplified version of the question is how important is the actual play calling of this versus just making sure the options are well taught?
Obviously I think the options being well taught is the most important thing because if it's well taught and the guys know what to do, I could call anything and they're gonna make me right. Now I can maximize them right by kind of this dart at a dartboard type of situation. And I think again, I got to give Dan credit here. At least when you watch games in Dallas, when they're in their bag, he's calling games and he knows when, hey, they're getting a feel. Let's throw this out there. And then all of a sudden, we get a sack or we get a turnover, whatever it is. And so that's a credit to the guys. It's a credit to the play caller. But I think, again, that's something Joe, any first-time play caller is going to have to do it. And the other thing I want to just point out here, another reason I did this project is because I think about it from an offensive perspective too. So I look at Kyle, right? And he's kind of the the architect of this resurgence of West Coast offense or whatever. I don't know how you want to characterize that. But, Sean's from his tree, quote unquote, Mike McDaniels, Matt LaFleur, and all of those offenses are the skeleton is the West Coast under Kyle Shanahan. But it's evolved, it's like they've become like Darwinian. They've become like different birds with different beak lengths. Like they're kind of the same, but kind of different. Right. And I think like, that's what I'm excited to see here from Joe Witt is like, how does he make it his, right? Because maybe he doesn't like the randomness of it. Maybe he wants something a little bit more specific, but I think that if he abides by the tenets, right, which is what you talked about, right? The pass rush, the illusion of complexity in the secondary, enough variety to throw people off, which we've seen. Like there were days early in OTAs where, like we talked about it, like Dominique Hampton, it looks like man coverage, 100% man. They get to Tampa 2 and Jaden's got to hold the football. You know what I'm saying? Like that's good stuff. Or in the red zone, like we talked about, it looks like quarters. They stem to 2. It's just enough of a little bit of a change up and we get a big play out of it as a defense because we got a pick, right? Like that's ultimately what you're looking for. So I don't know if they're scripting those periods. I think some of those are call-outs, but he already seems to have a feel. I mean, he's worked with Dan for a long time. I'm excited to see the change under Joe Witt. I'm excited to see how he kind of settles in as a play caller. But ultimately, like I trust the principles, right, that you were talking about earlier. Like I trust that process. So I think the defense is going to be good, even if it might look a little bit different.
No doubt about it. I'm excited. It should be fun. Unfortunately, we have to wait 30-something more days. Although it's not that long. Training camp announced yesterday. I guess we're a little over a month away. July 28th is the first practice, and those first couple will be open to fans as well. So should be a fun time in Ashburn, even if it could be 98 degrees with 94% humidity in late July. Practice is at 9 a.m. Logan. So we won the practice time lottery and beat there. So. Yay, Dan. Good job. All right. That was really cool. That was good stuff. And if you missed any of it, the good news is this is a podcast, so you can rewind and digest it all on your own time as you go throughout your weekend. We'll be back, speaking of defense, early next week with our NFC East divisional position group rankings for linebackers, defensive line, and DBs. So we'll do that coming up on the early podcast next week. And then we have some cool stuff planned over the next few weeks as well. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time. If you like what you heard, make sure you subscribe and see you next week on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.